Why the most dangerous lies sound the most beautiful, Orwell explained. Have you ever heard something so beautifully said that you almost didn't want to question it? A phrase that felt like truth, not because it was proven, but because it was poetic, comforting, noble, righteous. Maybe it was something like, war is necessary for peace, or freedom is dangerous, or if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. These are the kinds of phrases that slip past your defenses. They sound too perfect to be false. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. George Orwell understood this better than almost anyone. But he didn't just write about dystopias, he dissected how language itself can be used to manipulate our perception of reality. He warned us that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones we recognize as lies. They're the ones that sound the most beautiful. We often think of lies as something crude, blunt instruments used by the obviously corrupt. But Orwell showed us a far more terrifying truth. The most effective lies wear the mask of virtue. They don't just deceive you, they seduce you. They appear wrapped in the language of morality, compassion, security, even progress. And because they appeal to our highest ideals, we don't resist them. We embrace them. We repeat them. We become their messengers.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
That's the genius and horror of Orwell's concept of doublethink. It's not just about holding two contradictory beliefs at the same time, it's about losing the ability to even see the contradiction. In 1984, the slogans of the party are perfect examples. War is peace, but freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. These aren't just paradoxes, they're strategies. They're designed to reshape your mental map of reality. Because once you accept that war can be peace, you no longer question endless conflict. Once you believe that too much freedom is dangerous, you start welcoming surveillance. Once you're convinced that ignorance is strength, you stop seeking truth and start fearing it. Think about how language works in our own world. We don't torture people, we enhance interrogation. We don't spy on citizens, we collect metadata. We don't wage wars, we liberate nations. The truth is buried under layers of euphemism. And the more beautiful the language, the easier it is to hide brutality. Orwell wasn't warning us just about governments, he was warning us about ourselves. Because we're the ones who let language do our thinking for us. We're the ones who repeat phrases without examining them. We're the ones who fall in love with the sound of words, even when those words are hollow. So here's a question that should haunt you. What beliefs do you hold right now, not because you've deeply examined them, but because they were beautifully packaged? What phrases have you repeated without ever asking, what does this actually mean? Because Orwell's greatest fear wasn't censorship, it was self-censorship. A world where people no longer needed to be silenced because they had trained themselves not to think. This is where the beauty of lies becomes lethal. Because we don't just believe them, we build societies on them. We create policies, laws, ideologies, entire identities based on phrases that sound good but mean nothing. Or worse, mean the exact opposite of what they appear to say. Unity becomes a way to suppress dissent, and diversity becomes a tool for division. Peacekeeping becomes endless war. And we go along with it not because we're evil, but because we're tired. Because thinking is hard. Because questioning hurts. Because it's easier to nod along with the crowd than to stand alone and say, "This doesn't make sense." But here's the twist. Orwell didn't write 1984 because he believed we're doomed. He wrote it as a warning precisely because we're not. He believed that truth still matters, that language can still be reclaimed, and that individuals you can still resist. But resistance doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like asking one uncomfortable question. It looks like refusing to repeat a phrase just because everyone else is saying it. It looks like daring to say, "I don't know what this means, and I won't pretend I do." We need to understand that the war for truth is not fought with violence, it's fought with clarity, with the courage to sit in silence and ask, what is really being said here? What do these words actually point to? And most importantly, who benefits from me believing this? That is the kind of thinking Orwell wanted to ignite. Not paranoia, not cynicism, but awareness. A kind of intellectual vigilance that protects you from the seduction of beautiful lies. Because once you see how language can be weaponized, you begin to listen differently. You begin to notice the gaps between words and reality. You begin to hear not just what's being said, but what's being hidden. And that awareness, that's power. The soft chains of language, how words become prisons while sounding like poetry. We often imagine oppression as something loud, soldiers in the street, censorship, bans, and brute force. But Orwell's brilliance was in revealing that the most effective control doesn't shout. It whispers. It speaks in soft tones, polished words, familiar phrases. It wraps itself in poetry, in what sounds like reason, compassion, progress. The most powerful form of control is the one that doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like agreement. It feels like consensus. It feels like language itself. Language is supposed to be a tool for truth. It's how we make sense of the world, how we shape ideas, how we express what matters. But Orwell showed us that language can just as easily be used to conceal truth. It can blur meaning until it vanishes entirely. And once that happens, we're not just misled, we're trapped. Not by force, but by the very words we use to think. And the prison becomes internal. We carry it in our vocabulary. In 1984, Orwell invented Newspeak to illustrate this principle, a controlled language engineered to limit the range of thought. Words were reduced and flattened. Complex ideas were erased not by burning books, but by removing the words that described them. If there's no word for freedom, how do you even begin to imagine it? If bad becomes ungood, if very bad becomes double plus ungood, nuance is destroyed. And with it, the ability to critique the world. This wasn't just science fiction. It was a metaphor for how real-world language is constantly being reshaped not to reflect reality, but to control it. And it happens all the time, all around us. We take the word tolerance. Once a word that meant enduring difference, it's now often used as a weapon demanding ideological conformity in the name of openness, or safety, which has been redefined not just as physical well-being, but psychological comfort, leading to the silencing of opposing views under the banner of protecting people. Progress is used to justify anything new, regardless of whether it's better. Patriotism becomes synonymous with blind loyalty. Justice becomes a brand, a buzzword, stripped of its complexity. These aren't just linguistic shifts. They're philosophical earthquakes. Because every time a word is manipulated, a thought dies. A conversation becomes impossible. And gradually we stop noticing. We repeat the phrases. We post them, wear them, chant them. not because they reflect reality, but because they make us feel safe, because they make us feel aligned with the group. And that's how the soft chains tighten word by word, slogan by slogan, until we can no longer think outside the ideology we helped build. But why do we allow this? Why do we embrace language that shrinks our minds instead of expanding them? Because the alternative uncertainty is terrifying. Clear, simple, beautiful lies give us comfort. They remove ambiguity. They provide a ready-made identity, a worldview, a script. All you have to do is repeat the right phrases, and you're safe. You're on the right side. You're one of the good ones. But the moment you start to question the words, to ask, what does this really mean? You step into no man's land. You risk misunderstanding. You risk isolation. You risk truth. And truth is messy. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. It demands that you think for yourself, that you examine your assumptions, that you sit with cognitive dissonance. It demands that you ask, again and again, who gave me these words? What were they trying to make me believe? That's why Orwell didn't just critique totalitarian regimes. He critiqued language itself. Language that becomes so beautiful, so polished, so morally righteous that it can no longer be questioned. Language that doesn't describe reality, it replaces it. And once we accept that replacement, we become complicit, and the lie becomes ours. We don't just live in a false world, we defend it. But here's the good news. Language can also be a tool for liberation. If it can be used to build prisons, it can also be used to tear them down. But only if you're willing to do the hard work, to pause when you hear something beautiful and ask, is this true? To dig beneath the surface of words and look for what's being hidden. To reclaim your own vocabulary, not just emotionally, but philosophically. Because the moment you take that step, you start to see the world differently. You start to hear things others don't. You start to notice that the emperor has no clothes and that the parade is made of slogans. And in that moment, you begin to do something terrifying and beautiful. You begin to think. So ask yourself, what words have become your prison? What ideas have you accepted because they sounded poetic, not because they were real? And what might happen if, just for a moment, you stripped away the slogans and tried to see the world as it is, not as it's described? That's where freedom begins, not with rebellion, not with violence, but with one quiet, dangerous question: what does this really mean? The illusion of consensus, why groupthink feels safe but kills the soul. There is a subtle seduction in consensus. When everyone around you is nodding in agreement, it feels like peace. It feels like safety. It feels like you must be on the right side of history. After all, how could so many people be wrong? If the crowd applauds the message, if your peers echo your beliefs, if your words get rewarded with approval, it feels like truth. But George Orwell and every great thinker who's ever dared to step outside the group would tell you the same thing. Consensus is not the same as truth. In fact, when it's unearned, when it's enforced, when it's unquestioned, consensus can be the enemy of the soul. We are social creatures. We crave belonging. And the modern world has amplified this craving to an almost unbearable degree. You don't just want to be liked, you want to be seen as good, smart, enlightened. You want to be part of the right conversations, the right movements, the right causes. And this desire, while natural, is a trap. Because once you tie your identity to the group, you lose the ability to think freely. You become an echo. And once you're an echo, you can no longer hear your own voice. Orwell understood this perfectly. In 1984, the citizens of Oceania don't just obey Big Brother, they love him. They chant his name. They cry during his speeches. And they're not pretending. They've convinced themselves that their loyalty is truth, that their love is real, that their hatred of the enemy is justified, and perhaps the most terrifying part, they believe it. That's the power of groupthink. It replaces inner conviction with outer alignment. It makes you feel virtuous for conforming. It makes you feel wicked for questioning. And it does it all in the name of unity, safety, progress. But here's the paradox. The more we chase consensus, the more we sacrifice what makes us human. Because to be human is to wrestle with doubt, to ask forbidden questions, to sit with discomfort, and to think thoughts that no one else is thinking. And yet, the more we wrap ourselves in the comfort of agreement, the more we lose that capacity. Slowly, silently, we become afraid not of being wrong, but of being different. Ask yourself, when was the last time you changed your mind because of a deep internal realization, not because the people around you changed theirs? When was the last time you said something unpopular, not to provoke, but because it was true to you? When was the last time you felt the heat of disagreement and stood firm, not out of pride, but because you knew you had seen something that others hadn't? These moments are rare, but they are the moments that define the individual. The illusion of consensus is that it offers safety, but what it really offers is silence. A silence where nothing new can be born, where real dialogue dies, where critical thought is replaced with slogans and applause. And the soul starves in that silence, because the soul doesn't want to be popular. It wants to be true. It wants to know. It wants to grow. But it cannot grow in an environment where every deviation is punished, where every question is suspect, where every thought must be pre-approved by the collective. Orwell's world wasn't just about censorship, it was about self-censorship. A world where people no longer needed to be told what to think, because they had already trained themselves never to think anything that might make them an outsider. And that world isn't fiction, it's real. It exists every time we choose comfort over clarity, every time we choose applause over truth. But here's the hope: you don't have to live that way. You can reclaim your mind. You can listen more deeply. You can speak more honestly. You can disagree without fear. And in doing so, you create space not just for yourself, but for others. Because when one person thinks freely, it gives permission for others to do the same. And maybe that's the real revolution Orwell was hoping for, not the overthrow of governments, but the rebirth of the individual, and the courage to think, to speak, to stand, to be. So, ask yourself, are you thinking your own thoughts, or are you just repeating what keeps you safe? Truth is not a feeling. Why meaning must be fought for in a world that profits from illusion? There's a dangerous idea that's crept into how we live, and think a quiet conviction that if something feels true, it must be true. We hear something that stirs emotion, that aligns with our values, that flatters our identity, and we accept it without resistance. But the truth is not a feeling. It's not comfort. It's not what makes you feel affirmed, validated, or inspired. The truth is indifferent to your emotions. It doesn't care if you like it. It doesn't become more real because 1,000 people reposted it or because it gave you goosebumps. And in a world that profits from illusion, we have to fight to remember that. Why? Because the modern world is engineered to sell us meaning. Not real meaning, simulated meaning. Ideas that feel profound but are hollow. Stories that feel righteous but are simplistic. Narratives that feel empowering but are rooted in manipulation. Every ad, every algorithm, every curated feed is designed to give you the illusion of understanding, the illusion of connection, the illusion of being on the right side. And we consume it gladly, because it's easier than doing the hard work of thinking, reflecting, doubting, and discovering. Orwell saw it coming. He knew that the real threat to truth wasn't brute force, it was subtle distortion. He understood that people wouldn't reject truth because it was false, but because it was unpleasant, because it was complicated, because it made them uncomfortable. In 1984, the regime didn't just control what was said, they controlled what was felt. They made citizens love their oppression, fear their freedom, and believe the most absurd lies because those lies were emotionally easier to accept than the lonely, recognizing alternative, independent thought. And that's the danger we face now. We've become addicted to narratives that feel good. We want clarity without contradiction, justice without complexity, identity without humility. We want the world to be arranged into neat categories, good people and bad people, true beliefs and false ones, heroes and villains. But reality refuses to comply. It's messy. It's paradoxical. It demands nuance. And that's why truth must be fought for. Not once, but constantly.